We are tonight's entertainment.
You can't handle the truth.
The fire rises.
Pizza time.
You're a wizard, Harry.
So it begins.
You know how much I sacrifice?
You think that's air you're breathing?
Groovy.
I don't have friends. I got family.
We are Sex People! 1, 2, 3, 4!
Craft Services.
Hey, Trent.
Hey, Parth.
So that's not Trent. It's my good friend Sophia.
Hi, all.
What have you been eating most recently?
Most recently, I had some pizza rolls. What about yourself?
Well, to give some backstory, Sophia, that's sort of what we do here. I had a production meeting for a movie that I'm producing and was not able to have lunch with you. Sophia and I are now roommates and often on the weekends have food together. And so then while I had my meeting, you heated up some pizza rolls. Now, the interesting thing here is we have a third roommate, Thomas Merkel. Thomas Merkel and I both got pizza rolls at the same time. In fact, I got mine first, and then he said, "That's a good idea." And he got his. So my question to you is, did you have my pizza rolls or his pepperoni pizza rolls?
My answer to you is both, as I was not sure whose pizza rolls were who, so I took a little of each, had both kinds of pizza rolls.
You're kind of a maverick, aren't you?
I know.
After my production meeting ended, I came out and asked Sophia, "What'd you have for lunch?" And she said, "Pizza rolls," in a weird voice. So, that's there.
I feel like that's not what I sound like.
And so then I heated up some classic Costco taquitos, which were delicious, as they always are. But that's enough about the taquitos. You may be wondering why our regularly scheduled co-host Trent Algair is not here. He's too busy working on a shoot and couldn't make it for this intro. But no worries. Sophia's here to lead us into the intro.
Cue the intro music. Welcome back to Craft Services, where we talk about the movies. Each week, we talk about a film and hopefully have a crew member of that film to talk with us about their experience working on the picture.
This week, we're talking with Kira Kelly, cinematographer of Him, Justin Tipping's feature film. Sophia, you and I both saw him at the same time. Wouldn't you say this is an excellent-looking movie?
It's beautiful.
I would say that it's maybe one of the best looking movies of this year. I really dug the look. And Kira Kelly is responsible for that. And she really gets deep into building a movie-specific camera rig so they could shoot X-ray footage and, thermal footage and normal footage at the same time, sort of a building on what Jordan Peele and Hoyte van Hoytema did on Nope. Don't you think that's cool, Sophia?
So cool, Parth.
Well, I sort of feel like I don't want to belabor the intro too much longer. I kind of feel like the audience is ready for an interview.
I know I am.
Yeah. Well, Sophia's ready, I guess. Cue the interview. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our interview with Kira Kelly. She's the cinematographer behind our film for this week, Justin Tipping's Him. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
So just to start off, could you tell us when you first wanted to become a cinematographer?
I always took still photos like in high school and things like that. And I was always a big movie lover. So I remember thinking, yeah, I'll go to film school. But I had no clue. Like I couldn't have told you what a producer did, what a director did. I certainly had heard of cinematographer, but really didn't know any of the specifics. So I went to school and just kind of as you do, work on other students' projects and all that. And there was one where I found myself in the lighting department. And I remember we were setting up this shot. It wasn't even a big shot. I think it was like a medium close up, something like that. And it was like the most intricate I'd ever seen, like the C-stands and the diffusion frames and the light and like the nets and all this stuff. And I remember being so excited and kind of proud about this little rig. And then the DP let me look through the eyepiece, and I just had this moment where I was like, oh my God, like the audience never sees any of this stuff that I like around the frame that I was so excited about, but they see the effect of every one of those things. And in that moment, I knew like, lighting was what I wanted to do, and then specifically cinematography. And that's when I was hooked.
Can you talk a bit more about your path towards your first big DP job?
Wow. I mean, it's interesting. It's kind of like there's so many different paths because sometimes it's hard to tell like which one is the one, but I can tell you about like my first feature. So at school, like I met, as you do, like all the folks in your class, and I started working with a friend of mine, Tom Gustafson, and I had shot all of his shorts and all that. And then he had a short film once we graduated that, he asked me to shoot, which was this musical called Fairies. And then, so Fairies did really well on like the festival circuit and all that. And then he got funding to do the feature version of that. And so in 2007 or 2008, we shot this movie called Were the World Mine. And it was like, super micro budget, but like we were able to figure out a way to put as much of, the money as possible on the screen. And so, it was like a big musical production and really fun. And it was at that point that I decided that before that I had been working after school. I worked as an electrician and then as a gaffer and kind of just worked my way up like that and was shooting as much as possible. But after I shot that movie, I was just like, okay, this is it. I'm going to stop gaffing. I'm just going to focus on cinematography. So yeah, that was a big step for me.
And then moving to the topic of the day, can you talk about becoming aware of him and what work you did to sort of book the job?
So I had worked before or tried to work a couple times. Jamal Watson, who was a producer at Monkey Paw, we had tried to work together on different projects. We just kept orbiting one another. And we hadn't gotten to work with each other yet. And he was one of the producers on him. And so I know that Jamal put my name in as a potential DP. And, I got the script and I was just like, at first just really excited about the script because it was super visual and just very different than anything I had done yet. I had the meeting, with Johnston, the director, and then the producing team. It was when I was in Albuquerque shooting a different movie called Resball. And that movie was like basketball. So it was interesting to be like, okay, another sports movie, but this sports movie was so different, than any other sports movie. I don't even know if it is a sports movie, but then it's a whole other genre also. So I remember having the meeting and I was like, okay, the meeting went well, but then the strikes happened. And so it was just like all bets were off. It was one of those things where like, okay, stop thinking about it. It's done. And then in November of that year, I got a call from the producers. They're like, yeah, we're going forward. The strike had finished and they asked me to be a part of it. And then Justin and I were meeting like at Squirrel here in LA, like a week later and just beginning like the whole conversation and the whole prep process and, talking lenses. We spent a few days at Panavision together and just went like fully into it. And it was a really exciting time.
Can you talk about your approach to the horror elements of this film as like the other half of the football?
Yeah. When we first started, Justin came with like a reference for this film I did not know about called The Holy Mountain, which is like this super surrealistic, just like, I don't even know how to explain it, but it's just visually incredible. And so I knew from the beginning that he was definitely set to do something very different. And then a lot of the other references we started talking about were films like more of like on the psychological end of horror, like Jacob's Ladder, The Shining, things like that. And so the approach that we kind of took to this is more of like this atmospheric horror, like this thing of like, the film is because of the football element, like a lot of it has to do with CTE, which is, the brain injury that comes from concussions. And an element of CTE is that there are hallucinations. And so it was kind of like this world of like, if you can tap into these hallucinations that Cam, our character, is having, like always just trying to play with whether or not it's real, whether or not he thinks it's real, or whether or not it's just something that's going on within his brain. We were really trying to play with the horror in that of like, you've gone through this injury and then on top of that, like being so unsure of what reality is. And that was where where the hook was for us, as far as like trying to figure out how to put the audience in his feeling of unease and uncertainty.
Yeah, and I guess a big part of that is the sort of X-ray vision look and like those visions, which was the thing that sold me on the movie when I saw the first trailer.
Yeah.
And so as I sort of understand it based on some other interviews, it was sort of working off of what maybe like Jordan Peele and Hoyte van Hoytema had done with Nope, but could you, for the audience, just sort of explain that whole rig and that, you know, that setup process, what that took to figure that out?
So for us, we really wanted to make sure, like how we wanted to use the FLIR footage was like this military grade camera called the FLIR, which is a thermal camera. And what Justin wanted was, like, for example, we have a shot, like a shot of Cam, and he didn't want to have to cut around the impact to suddenly get into this, you know, into this FLIR, like sort of X-ray camera. He wanted to be able to cut directly from the Alexa 35 camera into the FLIR. And so we knew that we had to figure out a way of like some sort of stereo rig or some way to have those cameras together and rolling at the same time. So it was a seamless edit. So it's to make it even more jarring in the impacts. So, you know, when we first started, like, you know, Justin in the beginning he sent me this music video that was done entirely with FLIR and had some really great VFX on top of it for like skeletons and all that. And then this was around the time when Jonathan Glazer's Zone of Interest had come out. And there's that whole just hauntingly gorgeous night section that he's got that's used with thermal camera. So, but we were still trying to figure out how to make it with, like, you know, lined up with our Alexa. Long story short, like, we were supposed to rent the camera, but then it ended up being some insurance thing with like through Universal. We couldn't rent it or we couldn't get the technician, something like that. But then our first AC, Megan Noche, found this FLIR on eBay. And so we ended up buying it. We got it 2 days before the camera test. So it was like suddenly this like all hands on deck thing of like trying to figure out how to build a stereo rig with this camera. I just found out that there's this company called Radiant Images that has succeeded in building this rig that I wish that we had like 2 years ago. But so when we first got it, it was just like this quick series of tests before the camera test of like, okay, can we do it on a stereo rig? And like, you know, I was trying to do it through filters, but it doesn't see through glass because glass emits temperature. So we couldn't, like, trying to figure out how the stereo rig without being able to see through the two-way glass. So ultimately what we decided to do is like Megan took the camera home and like she 3D printed a follow focus that she hot glued on top of it. My key grip, Rudy Covarrubias, built this rig that we just sat the FLIR right on top of the Alexa. And so we figured out, like, through some testing that if we put the 50 millimeter lens on the Alexa and had the subject about 5 feet away from both cameras, that's when the two cameras would start to converge. And so we were able to get like our own little DIY stereo rig. And in the beginning, it was like, it ended up being this huge beast. But then the more we used it, the more we streamlined it. And so ultimately, like, our camera operator, Scott Dropkin, was able to do it handheld and all that. So yeah, it ended up being like a really fun tool that we could play with as far as like just making sure that those impacts were really felt. And I feel like that the shot that they have in the trailer is like the perfect example of what we wanted it to do, because, you know, I think we've become so numb to, you know, violence in general in films and then, you know, violence in sports and all this stuff. But it was really important to show like these hits that people are taking, or like, you know, oh, it's just a concussion. Well, a concussion is like when your head hits something and your brain starts sloshing around and then swells. So we really wanted to be able to figure out a way to show that. So it worked out.
So all the time in the film at Isaiah's compound is sort of divided into chapters circa days. Were you thinking about these chapters differently at all?
Yeah, you know, in prep, Justin, we had a series of meetings, and it was like you know, me, Justin, our production designer, Jordan Ferrer, and our costume designer, Dominique Dawson. And we would have, I think we ended up doing like 2 or 3 separate page turns just for us, you know, heads of department. So we could really talk about like what Cam's descent was. Like his, you know, to really kind of take like, you know, day by day where Cam is as far as like in relationship to his reality, in relationship to Isaiah, Marlon's character, and then just in relationship to the movie in general. So Justin really had it mapped out as to like which days where his psyche was. So yeah, those days did play an important part for all of us in prep, and then also while we were shooting too.
Where was this like compound shot? And I just wanted to also ask, you brought up production designer Jordan Ferrer. Can you talk about that collaboration? Because I think that there's such a great blend of production design and lighting, and it all feels of a piece. Can you just sort of talk about that with the compound?
Yeah, Jordan Ferrer is amazing. And I think that, early discussions, well, first of all, to answer the first question, the compound exterior, like that weird sort of like shaped place, is at this place in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, called the Spaceport. And it's like NASA has all these like secret planes and all this like stuff there. We could only, I remember, so there's like a mix, when he opens the door and goes in, it's like going from the exterior to our interior set builds that we built in Albuquerque. But we could only, I think it was something like we could only go inside of that building about 8 feet. And that's where the blue screen was. And then that was it. We couldn't go behind it. It was like super secretive. So yeah, that exterior was in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. And then we built sets for most of the other parts of the compound in Albuquerque. There was, there's that long hallway, like gallery hallway, the curved gallery hallway that Isaiah and Cam first meet in. That was a part of the stadium that we shot the last bit in. So that was like a real location, but everything else was something that, these sets that Jordan created. And, in prep, we really started just talking about, like, I knew that I wanted to have the freedom, especially like in the recovery room, also in the film room fight, like that last space where they have the big fight under the red and magenta lighting. I wanted the freedom because I knew that we were going to be there, throughout most of the movie. And like, we're like, again, talking about like the different day structure. I wanted the freedom to be able to light it in a way, whereas like each scene was like a different sort of color mix depending on what was happening within that scene. So it was a lot of close conversations between me and Jordan and Bob Bates, our gaffer, just to be able to make sure that we were able to integrate lighting within each of those sets. And so that was like a lot of fun in prep, making sure that, we had enough, like there was, vortexes, there were Hyperions, there were like LED strips like built in almost every part of that set. And specifically in the recovery room, like we looked at a lot of James Turrell, like his installation pieces with how color worked in those spaces. And then ultimately at the end of the film, where we find him in that room, and there's like that big dial of sunlight and he kind of like crawls off of the ice bath. We wanted to feel like the first time, sunlight had gotten into that room, throughout this. It was the first time sunlight got into that room, in the whole film. And like, that was another part of it too. Like it, in the location in Spaceport, we wanted to make it feel like the compound was, below ground basically. And so there was always sort of like these lights from above, and maybe the deeper he got, the further away from sunlight and the outside world that he ends up getting.
There's lots of quick anatomical, like blood and organs inserts. We were wondering if you could talk about the process of achieving those.
That like the slimy sort of, that body creature. Yeah. Apparently that was, I don't know, something, what was that thing? It was like it's like a ballistics dummy. And so it's like, I guess they use it for training to see how, I guess, either artillery or bullets impact the human body. And so for those transitions, it was like, the whole thought for, Justin is just about like, stripping Cam down to, his core, like his basics. He's, these players are used for their physical bodies and that's it. Right. And so we had this dummy and we found that like, if you just, they melt basically. So we had this whole unit that was off to the side that was shooting this body decompose basically. And so we'd have these all hot lights on it, like as many like tungsten sources as we could and heaters and all these things to see how we could just make this body into like a puddle. And then Justin and Taylor Mason, our editor, like at the end, like put it together in the sequence. It's just like totally strange. And I think that was fun too. I mean, we were playing with so much, like even with the thermal camera stuff. I remember the first day of the camera test, we had like ice packs, ice water, heat guns, blow dryers, like trying to just figure out all the different heating elements. And then ultimately to have this body that ends up like just melting on its own was like a really fun sort of just, again, like playing into Justin's love of like the surreal visual element that we used.
All of the compositions feel very intentional, but there is also, like you're saying, all these different layers that you're able to play with. How improvisational were you on set? Like, were you working directly off a storyboard set? Was there any like figuring it out on set?
There was like definitely a combo. So we storyboarded a lot of the main sequences. Like, for example, the drill, the timing drill, when the guy Cedric gets hit in the face repeatedly with the football, that was storyboarded, although later we did end up like that was storyboarded. We had like, overheads and all that. But one of my favorite, stories about this is like also my love for our editor, Taylor, is that, we were shooting that scene and we had finished it. We had shot it. She got the dailies back, and obviously she was watching everything that we were doing. And we were about to leave that location. Like that, I think that location was like in our second week of shooting, something like that. So we had to wrap that place. And so Taylor sent this email of just like, oh, it would be great to have just a few more shots to build that sequence. And I remember I got the list. I was like, damn, this is a lot more than a few shots. But what was so amazing is like we got as many as we could. We we ended up, all those shots of the ball, all the different angles of the jugs machine. And I'm so happy that we were able to do that because like the sequence that she built of that is just so amazing. And in its repetition, you kind of feel the time trickling away as this guy's getting hit in the face. So that was a great example of like something that was boarded that we had, ended up shooting. But then, once, we had Taylor look at it, adding more to it. So it was like something that we were able to find on the day or the next day to end up building that sequence. There were like, a lot of the stuff like day one, which was fun with him and, Marlon just like playing around. That was just very loose. We knew that they were going to be throwing the ball. Very loose, I guess. But then we also had this massive rig in there to try to throw the ball down the field as quickly as possible. So we were always like playing with some of these, different toys and elements to build those. I'm trying to think of ones. Like the party, Savior's Party, that one wasn't necessarily boarded, but we definitely had shot lists that we were working on. And we had a list of things that we ended up wanting to do, but it was never like a hard and fast thing. It was something that we have a plan, but then let's see where we end up as far as with the actors blocking and their performance. So yeah, we were able to have the rules that we liked, but then play around them. And it was fun. It was something like, when we had the football elements, we knew that we wanted the film to be a lot more moving and kinetic and having a lot more motion. But then, yeah, once he gets down into more and more into the compound, we definitely went for more of the locked frames and more restrained and like, physically trapping him and a lot of these like really fun symmetrical center punch compositions.
That huge rig that you had, I read that it was like a boomerang rig for the football's POV and then you sometimes put a helmet on it. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so those were two different rigs. So the helmet rig was just like we had the handheld camera that Rudy, our key grip, made all these little, he rigged basically a football helmet to it. We cut out the back of the football helmet and put it over the front of the lens. The boomerang rig was something where, Justin was like, wouldn't it be cool if we could like send the camera down the field as fast as a football? And I was like, okay, yeah, that would be cool. I think that's a fun part with Justin. Like he like sprinkles in these moments, not just to me, but like the whole crew of like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? And it was like this fun invitation to like, okay, how can you figure this out? And so what we did was Rudy built this like long truss rig in this space. And then we put a remote head, we underslung a remote head under it. And through a series of winches, they were able to throw this camera down the truss super fast. And then it would come back. We shot a lot of it coming back and it wouldn't come back as fast as it went down that way. But that's how we ended up calling it the boomerang rig. So yeah, it's a camera underslung on this huge length of truss and then winches that just throw it down the length of the truss.
What an interview.
Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and Sophia's definitely heard it at this point. Yes, thank you so much to Kira Kelly for taking part in this interview. You are the bomb. She was actually super, super cool, and I think gave some really cool information. And if you really liked it, I mean, you might see that this is titled Part 1. You may think, well, surely there's got to be a Part 2 coming out.
Surely.
What do you think? Is that in the cards, Sophia?
I sure hope so.
So Sophia's not a regular co-host of this podcast, so she couldn't tell you that next week you're going to be getting part 2 of our interview with Kira Kelly on on Ham. Okay. And you're going to be able to listen to that on all your major podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, etc. And you can check us out on our social media on Instagram and Twitter. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star rating. We'll take 4. Say some nice things about us. Leave a review. If you don't like the show, put the phone away. You know, it's all cool. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Bye.